Welcome back to the Access Vikings podcast. I'm Emily Leiker, joined by my Minnesota Star Tribune colleagues Andrew Krammer and Ben Goessling. We are wrapping up the preparation for the Vikings' first meeting with the Packers this season, which comes Sunday at Lambeau Field in Green Bay. We are, as you can see, not at TCO. We're recording a little bit earlier in the day than we would normally on Fridays, but we still got some details to give you guys about what we think game statuses may be based on practice, what we heard from JJ McCarthy and Justin Jefferson in the past few days, and then, of course, listener questions and our Vikings Flashback Friday. So let's start, Andrew, talking about practice and what we've seen the past few days, who's been out there. Obviously, Wednesday was just a walkthrough, but Ryan Kelly, it seems like he's in a good spot that he may be able to go. You talked to him earlier this week for quite a bit of time.
Yeah. He was funny too. At that time when I was talking to him, JJ McCarthy walked by and put his arm around him and said, "Well, just answer one question. Are you going to wear the Guardian cap the rest of the season?" And Ryan turned to him and said, "At least for this week, at least for this week." So he seemed to give away that he intends to come back and play. And the roster move with the Vikings, Ben, you shared that it seems like they're kind of clearing space for him to come back. So it's just a good sign to see where he's at mentally. He talked about being in a much better place than he was 2 months ago when he talked about concussions being a symptom of them being you get emotional. He had talked about. He said you get more in touch with your emotional side. He said I was a little erratic when we were in London in the week following that second concussion, wondering why did this happen? What is going on? And he took some time. He said he took some time to soul search and figure out whether or not he still wanted to play. He went and saw multiple specialists, which including Dr. Michael Collins out in Pittsburgh. He said the Vikings flew him out there for that to go see him, and then went through multiple physical therapy appointments at TCO with somebody trained in neurological injuries. So he went through a lot in these 2 months, discussions with family and friends, teammates about what he wanted to do. And he came to the conclusion, as Kevin O'Connell said, that he still wants to play. And so the Vikings are supporting him in doing that. And he'll come on the field with a new helmet too. And obviously that Guardian cap that JJ McCarthy had asked about.
Yeah, I talked to Will Fries yesterday as well, and I was like, Will is the only guy that's played all 10 games this season on this line that's just been ravaged by injury. And as we said on Wednesday, this could be the first game all season that those 5 play together, which is just crazy. But Will said it was definitely exciting that was going to happen, and he was looking forward to it. I mean, because he's obviously had a little bit more responsibility on his plate, just having to be one of the consistent pieces in there with that. The other guy we've been watching this week is Jonathan Grenard, who's had a left shoulder injury. He missed last week. He was out of practice on Wednesday. Again, that was just a walkthrough, but he was listed as a non-participant. He was out there on the field yesterday, was marked limited. He said that he is pretty confident he's going to be able to go Sunday. So again, we'll see when game statuses come out later today. But it looks like the Vikings are in good shape. Those were really the only 2 guys we were closely monitoring this week, and both of them seem pretty positive. Ben, on Wednesday, of course, after we recorded the podcast, we talked to JJ McCarthy as we normally do, and it was coming off that Bears loss on Sunday that we've detailed plenty. What stood out about what JJ McCarthy said to us on Wednesday, which I think in part started with one of the questions you asked him about some of his mechanics?
Yeah, I basically just asked him how much of this is new to you in terms of what you're being taught or being asked to do now versus what you've done in the past. And he said, a lot of it is very new to me. And that's, I think, everything from mechanics to, probably the way you're coached to play the position a little bit. But yeah, he said a lot of that is to be expected when you come to the NFL. But it was interesting to me how much it still seemed like a lot of this is a work in progress. I mean, Kevin O'Connell talked this week about looking forward to the cement drying on some of these changes they've made. And it invites the question of, if there was still that much work to do, were they overconfident in thinking that you could do it this quickly? I mean, I think that's probably going to be one of those things that's a little clearer in the look back on this as we get a little more time where we can assess the season as a whole. But yeah, it was striking to me how much he still felt like this is a big adjustment. I mean, we've talked about some of the things that they've wanted to see. They wanted to be left foot forward rather than playing neutral. I think they wanted his quick game footwork to be a little bit different. They were worried about him taking too long of steps in the dropbacks at times, and you see things where he's clicking his heels together, which is something that they want to get rid of. The leg whip, I mean, all of these kind of nuancy mechanics things are basically contributing to him not throwing from a stable base as often as you'd like. I mean, it looks at times like a pitcher, following through with the leg, and it's different in the sense that you're not throwing a baseball, you're throwing an oblong football, and you're trying to make it catchable rather than trying to have it miss a bat. So I think there's a lot of that is still very much in the learning phase. And it was interesting to hear him talk about it. Both he and Kevin O'Connell have been pretty honest about that. And you hear people say, well, they probably shouldn't be so honest because they're admitting that this is a work in progress. But I think it's fascinating to hear it. And the thing is, we can all see it. We can see it on Sundays. Them admitting that, yeah, this is still a work in progress, I don't think is giving a tell to anybody. I mean, it's fascinating to see this go on in real time. And it just reminds you how much there is an adjustment when you're coming into the league from an offense that didn't throw a ton in college and you're just as young as he is. There's going to be a pretty significant learning phase here. So I thought it was fascinating to hear all of that and how that's impacting the way he goes through the week.
Andrew, anything that stood out to you from McCarthy the other day?
No, just I would reiterate what Ben said. The rewiring of neurological pathways is a quote that really puts into context of how massive this kind of transition is for him in terms of learning it. It shows about, and we know this, quarterbacks at the college level are not taught the same way in the NFL. They're not taught to run the same offenses, even if it was a pro-style offense under Jim Harbaugh at Michigan. Kevin O'Connell obviously has a much different standard and a much broader variety, I would assume, of things to get to for the young guy. So it really stands out when he talks about it.
Well, and we fixated on that phrase, rewiring of neurological pathways, but that is what happens anytime you learn something new. I mean, I remember music teachers talking about this growing up. This is why you learn things slowly when whether it's a musical instrument, a language, a golf swing, anything that you're teaching motor skills, you do it slowly so that you can learn it right the first time, because what you are having to do is train your brain to kind of remember all of these things. This is muscle memory. It's basically a fancy way of talking about muscle memory. The connection between the brain and the body is what's going on. And when you do it, it takes some time to relearn it, especially if you learned it a different way. What he's effectively having to do is take a jackhammer to the roads, the neurological pathways that were already laid, and then put down new concrete and new cement, as Kevin O'Connell has talked about. So the reason this is tricky is because he is trying to unlearn the way he's been taught in the past. And it does sort of remind you that when you go from different coaches and different teachers that are going to look for different things, this is not going to be a perfect process. There is not a seamless way that this position is taught from age 10 to age 22, 25, 28, 31, whatever. So this process is going to be a little bit messy. This is something that you deal with all the time. I mean, when I'm coaching runners, we talk a lot about let's get the mechanics right when they're freshmen, because if we're trying to do it when they're seniors, it's harder. So all of this stuff is, it sounds, kind of new agey. It's not. I mean, he's just talking about the science of what's happening. And I think it's a reminder that when you're doing it at this point in your career, it is going to take a little more time, because it is that process of unlearning and relearning. And it's just, the human brain is very adaptable. The plasticity of the brain is an impressive thing, but it doesn't happen overnight.
No, and it's also why you teach, it's easier to teach young children things.
Correct.
It's easier to learn a second language when you're a child versus when you're an adult. Yeah. Let's get into some questions, because there were a few in here that I thought were good ones about JJ McCarthy. Starting with this one from Steve P, who emailed it into us. Again, you can do that at accessvikings@startribune.com. Steve asked, everyone, including KOC, is saying that JJ McCarthy needs more NFL experience and time on the field. We regularly are being reminded that he has only started 5 games. With that in mind, why didn't KOC play McCarthy at all during the 3 preseason games where he could have gained some limited experience? He seemed to treat JJ like a proven veteran. Of course, McCarthy played just 1 series in that opening preseason game. That's pretty much all the starting offense played at all in the preseason. But yeah, I think this is an interesting one, and it's something it's not just a KOC thing. It's league wide that a lot of offenses now, or just a lot of teams in general, do not play their starters, even if they're on the younger side.
Yeah, I mean, they have certainly moved in the direction of not playing their starters much at all, and that's something you see, like you say, around the league, especially I think in the younger cohort of coaches that Kevin O'Connell is from, and Kevin O'Connell kind of frequents in terms of looking for advice. The way that Sean McVay does these things is pretty instructive for the way the Vikings do things, because Kevin O'Connell takes a lot of cues and has been pretty heavily influenced by Sean McVay. So the joint practices become kind of the stand-in for some of the preseason action, and we can debate how good of a stand-in that is. Is it game speed? Is it as instructive, as transferable to a regular season game as a preseason game might be? But this is a risk reward thing. I think a lot of this is they haven't played their starters because they don't want to expose them to the possibility of major injuries, and they've been able to avoid that for the most part. But yes, this is more art than science, probably, in terms of how much you need to play a guy. And maybe McCarthy could use more, but if you didn't want to put the lineman out there, then who's blocking for him? I mean, all of this stuff is a more nuanced question as a result. I do think the lack of game reps has showed up. I think that's been very obvious that he has not had those in the NFL. But, how much would it have been worth it? And what's the injury risk? And can you justify it by the benefit of what comes from those preseason games? That's where the question gets a little trickier.
Yeah, and I know there's a line of questioning within this coaching staff that we're all aware of how useful preseason reps are, especially at that position. We've heard people talk about within that building of like, how useful would it have been for any quarterback to go out there when you're not seeing those defensive looks ever? Like, you're not going to go out there and see the Raiders play whatever coverages they were not playing in the preseason. Yeah. And like you said, Ben, too, like, he just got hurt in the preseason. Like that just happened. And I know you shouldn't be reflexive and beholden to the most recent thing that happened to you, but like, it's so revisionist history to go back and be like, well, you should have put him out there. It's like the guy had just gotten hurt in his last full preseason game. He was out there. This team wanted to keep him under lock and key to make sure he got to week 1, healthy enough to perform like he did. And so for him to play 1 series, it was the complete MO of what they did with Sam Darnold, who got out there for 12 reps his first summer with the team, or his only summer with the team. And that's just how they do it. And they wouldn't have put him out there with Christian Darrisaw. It wouldn't have been with Justin Jefferson. It wouldn't have probably even been with Ryan, or no, I suppose Ryan Kelly went out there for a little bit, but it wouldn't have been with the full complement. And so what are you gaining from putting him out there with a half unit against a defense that's going to run the most vanilla thing he's ever going to see in the NFL, and perhaps give him false confidence? And I'm arguing the other side of this here. I don't necessarily, I think there's a debate of how useful preseason reps are, but we do know within the Vikings what they were thinking along those lines. That, and Ben, you could probably reinforce this better than I could, but like they question how valuable those reps are for a quarterback.
Yeah, they do. I think you laid out a lot of it pretty well there, that you're not seeing game specific coverages. Nobody's game planning for JJ McCarthy. Nobody's showing anything that they're going to use during the regular season. Yeah. If anything, it's going to be, like you said, the most basic kind of country coverages that you're ever going to see. And that's great if you can succeed against those coverages, but high school cover 3 type looks are not going to be what you see during the regular season. So, there could be an element of false confidence there. And I think generally it's just this question of, is the injury risk worth it? And this is why they want the joint practices. They initially had talked about doing 2 sets of those. I think in the initial plan, it was going to be the Rams and the Patriots this year, rather than just the Patriots. I think what happened there is that the NFL did not give them a preseason game with the Rams, which would have allowed for the second set of joint practices. But they want those things effectively to be the preseason action for the starters. And I think that's going to be the way they continue to go about it with Kevin O'Connell, is how often are they going to do joint practices? It's probably going to be once or maybe twice a year, but it's probably never going to be 0 joint practices. So I think a lot of this is just how they're going to go about it. And they've deemed that the injury risk is too high to be worth trying to chase the benefit of whatever you're going to get from a preseason game.
Worth noting too that I think the best day we saw from JJ McCarthy in training camp was that second day of joint practices with the Patriots. Like he had a good showing. He was okay on the first day too, but that second day it was like, oh wow, okay, like here we are midway through training camp. JJ McCarthy's looking good. It's not just the Vikings defense, like all of this stuff. We were like, okay, he's going against someone else. It might look better, but it's all a really interesting gauge and an imperfect gauge. I think both like the preseason games and the joint practices. And I don't know that there's like a good answer for how you do that nowadays with how every team treats it.
I will say one other thing that comes to mind on this, and this is again probably either revisionist history or something worth revisiting into 2026. But when we've seen his clock a little bit sped up on the field, I do wonder how much the unfiltered Brian Flores experience in training camp maybe led into that, where there weren't very many reps. I mean, Kevin O'Connell has talked about there's a dealer's choice period at times where the offense could say, hey, we want you to kind of run a basic cover 2 here. Or we want to see what it looks like against this. Or, the defense could say the same thing. Don't throw all your motions and all of your, kind of package plays at us in this particular rep. We're trying to just get a base look here. But overall, there was not a lot held back, at least from what we saw. I mean, that defense was fired up. That defense wanted to make its presence felt. That defense was loud after plays. I do wonder at times how much the trial by fire, maybe there was a way to dial that back just a little, sand off a couple of the rough edges. I wonder if that would be or would have been useful. And, maybe it's a different calculation in his second year as a starter as we're going into that next year. But that has come to my mind a little bit when we talk about, hey, he's playing a little fast. How much of that may have been influenced by the thing he imprinted on, which was playing against Brian Flores' defense.
You guys remember it was it Tyler Batty he shoved off in a practice? And we come to find out Tyler Batty, the undrafted rookie, is a certified psycho, as his teammates call him. The tush push stopper, Tyler Batty.
He would get right down there and in the action. Okay, this is another one partially about JJ from Steve M on X. Patience with QB JJ is obviously warranted, but how long should we expect wide receiver JJ, as in Justin Jefferson, to have any? And I will say this has come up, I feel like, increasingly the past 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. Justin Jefferson has maintained that it's not like it's the frustration is there, but he's like he very much maintains that he understands that JJ's going through things as a young quarterback, learning that like the frustration isn't at JJ, it is at the situation, it's at not winning, how he's an ultra competitor. That's all come up. The team has talked about how grateful they are to have Justin Jefferson acting the way he is in this whole situation. I know like fans have been like, oh, he looks frustrated on the broadcast. And yes, I would agree. Some of the moments you're seeing look frustrated. But again, we talked about this with one of the Flashback Fridays a couple weeks ago, where I was like, you don't see the type of outbursts from Jefferson, like of fully slamming his helmet or like yelling at people as you did a few years back. Like that's not happening. So it's interesting to see kind of the dialogue around his frustration. But I guess, what do each of you think about just how much more rope maybe he has to give in this one?
The place my mind goes is, have we seen Justin Jefferson go AWOL on a practice and then show up 2 days later and conduct a press conference unbeknownst to the PR department in which he says there's truth to all rumors, as Andrew puts his hood up?
He had this look going.
Sick.
Yeah.
Yes, he had a little bit of the Karen Smith from Mean Girls. I'm sick. We have not seen Justin Jefferson do that. So I say that to say that in fairly recent Vikings history, there is an example of this being much worse than this has been. So the player, of course, we were talking about was traded for the pick that became Justin Jefferson, Stephon Diggs,
Right.
obviously, who we're talking about. So we have seen this with Stephon Diggs. Percy Harvin had some dramatic moments throwing a weight at Brad Childress. I think he got into it with Leslie Frazier my first year on the beat in 2012. Randy Moss, of course, is famous for some of these things. So this can be a lot different than it is. And I think this is also where the relationship between Justin Jefferson and Kevin O'Connell comes in, because the two of them talk a lot. And Kevin O'Connell has been fairly forthright about Justin Jefferson being the face of the franchise, which is something you don't necessarily see ascribed to a wide receiver, especially if you have a quarterback that you're kind of trying to build around. And that'll change eventually. I mean, JJ McCarthy will play more of that role, but there has been very much this approach with Justin Jefferson of you are almost in that seat of the quarterback in terms of everybody looks to you. You are the person that sets the tone. And I think O'Connell has said that almost as a way of challenging him to embrace that mindset and what it means, what the weight of your words are and the weight of your body language is. So when the cameras are on him that much, I think they are all very mindful of those things. And I think the way you've seen him approach it, being able to kind of rein those things in, even if we see momentary outbursts on the sidelines, is a pretty concerted effort to understand what those actions and words mean in terms of their effect on the whole team.
Yeah, and it feels like praising him is almost like, I think there's a line of thinking among some fans, at least that I've talked to, of like, well, he's just acting the way he should. But, it's a lot easier to say that when, you're not the $35 million per year athlete who has a reputation, a name to not only keep established, but live up to, and all those things. And
records he's trying to chase.
Yeah. And you're not just the face of the Vikings, you're the face of the league. Like, flag football is coming to you being like, can you be our global ambassador? They're banging down his door and annoying him for a ton of things. And I don't mean annoying as in he's actually annoyed. I mean, that's how I would take it, just being annoyed by constant things. He doesn't seem annoyed by it though. And the Vikings PR staff talks about that, of like his PR guys talked about how we have to say no to things for him because we don't think he'll actually say no to it. So he's just so affable and such a face for the league and for the team that he's a unicorn as a personality in this league as much as he's a unicorn on the field as a player. And like, that's kind of the cool thing to see, and to see him grow. Like, of course there's going to be frustrations and there's going to be things that aren't said about the young quarterback because you've got to protect him and you've got to protect the team, and he's a leader on this team and that's what you do. So, but the way he's done it has been impressive for what is he, 26 years old?
He's like a year older than me.
Yeah. That's incredibly impressive for where he's at.
The other thing is that we know entering this, like the start of off-season work, organized team activities, that him and Kevin O'Connell did sit down and have some sort of conversation. We don't really know how intense it was or how like you need to do this it was versus just like one of their convos that, as you said, Ben, they have regularly. But there was some discussion between them of him needing to be more present, more involved. That's why we saw him show up at OTAs, which is not something he has been known to do. Like, he has been here throughout this whole process. Obviously, he was injured during training camp and was still out there pretty much every single day on the field with JJ or with the young wide receivers and working with them and trying to make sure everyone was up to snuff. So there's been a concerted effort around that this year. And I think all the things we've talked about with his personality, just being more affable and into that and patient, and the conversations with Kevin O'Connell, I think that all ties in. Let's keep rolling here. This one's from Dan T. We're sticking with the offense. Can you provide some insight on what seems to be an increase in the amount of drops by receivers? I know JJ hasn't been the most accurate, but it's been absolutely killing drives when the ball does get there. It isn't caught. Seems to be across the board and not just one position. And that would be a correct assessment. I don't have PFF pulled up right now, but I think it ended up being 6 drops that they listed. Justin Jefferson, right. Jordan Addison, Adam Thielen, TJ Hawkinson, and Aaron Jones were all listed as having one. But there's some nuance there in what goes down as a drop and doesn't.
Yeah, that's how Kevin O'Connell, I think, put it when he got asked about it after the game on Sunday. We need to differentiate between true drops and maybe if it's outside your frame, in other words, if you're having to go up here, or you can't see if my hands are outside my body, but you get my point, that it's not being thrown right here and somebody's dropping it all the time. And I think what he's saying when he says that is it's not all on the receivers. And I think when you look at, there are 6 names on that list, basically, or 5 names for 6 drops. The commonality there is the quarterback. And I think at times you see, everybody's seen it. We're not saying anything that anybody doesn't know, that he throws a lot of missiles, and sometimes those are harder to catch when you're, sometimes coming out of a break, turning around. We saw the one with TJ Hawkinson earlier this year where it just gets on him so fast that it's a little harder of a ball to catch. So I think, some of those certainly should be caught. I mean, I think the one Jordan Addison had, and you can talk about the Jefferson touchdown a week ago. There are a lot of those that if it hits you in the hands and it's, at eye level, you should catch that. As an NFL receiver, you should catch that. But there are also, I think, ways to throw a more catchable ball with a little more touch, a little less pace on it, that may help some of these things as well.
Yeah, Kirk Cousins was not really known for his arm strength, and Justin Jefferson set a whole bunch of records with that guy. And it's just, I think O'Connell's mentioned arm strength too as not necessarily being a top, 2-3 thing he needs in a quarterback. And it doesn't mean it's a negative. It means it could be very, very impactful. Matthew Stafford's arm strength helps him a ton all the time. But he also does just. Sorry, what was that?
Sam Darnold had a lot of it.
Yeah. So it certainly helps you, but you got to have so many other things before that. And we're seeing the inaccuracy combined with the arm strength makes some of these things incredibly hard to come down with. Even the touchdown catch against, I'm trying to remember who it was. It might've been Detroit, the 10-yarder from Jefferson, where he just one hands it like this missile over his shoulder. He kind of just quickly grabs. Like it requires like a above average catch sometimes to come down with his passes. So yeah, Ben, I thought what you wrote about his batted passes and the drops, like it just, some of those hidden, or not hidden, but some of the stats can be due to his hidden issues that people otherwise don't talk about.
Yeah, I mean, you think about, he's completing 50% of his passes. Like, how many of those are hitting somebody in the hands, whether it's batted or a drop? I mean, it's not always that he's missing targets. And there's certainly examples of that too. I mean, certainly plenty of examples of that. But some of it you could help yourself by just throwing a little more catchable ball. And I think a lot of that is, we see that show up in a lot of places, but I think with the batted passes and then some of the drops, I think all of that probably comes back to the way he's delivering the ball to some degree.
2 more we're going to get through real fast. We had a lot of good ones this week, so thank you for listening and sending them in. This one's from Matt B on Blue Sky. Is Blake Brandel playing at a level at center that makes it feasible for him to be a starter next year, or is he still just a quality backup? Obviously, we've talked previously about Ryan Kelly's contract and how they might look to cut some of the fat in the cap space and needing to open more of that up. And that being maybe where they'll do it. But do we think Brandel has proved himself over these past however many weeks that Ryan Kelly has been out?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. When you watch it, going back and watching at least some of the recent games, I thought against Chicago, they blocked very well. But Chicago's interior defensive line is not very good. Oh. And when you saw them against better groups like Detroit, for instance, I thought it was much more uneven. And I do think, too, there's the growing pains of playing the position where some of the false starts. Guys have talked about the center's not getting it off on time. O'Connell saying maybe he couldn't hear it. Maybe it was on the quarterback. I just think there's some disconnect still with the young quarterback that if you had Ryan Kelly there, I'm just speculating. I wonder how many of those mistakes are and aren't happening. I think Brandel, has been learning on the job on that front a little bit. And so guys have really credited his knowledge of the game and how he can see and kind of decipher things, but it doesn't mean you're always making the call on time or with the right audible level that you need to, given the situation, all the things that go into it. And then frankly, there's a reason they replaced him with a first round guard this offseason. Like, I think he's, as a player, he was a 6th round pick. I think there's a ceiling there. And I think he's probably most valuable as a do-it-all backup.
That's what I was going to say, is that I think there is more value in having him be a backup for everyone than in pinning him down at one position.
I mean, and that is something we know they value. That is something they have prioritized over the years. That's part of the reason Ole Udo stayed around, is that guys that can play a couple different spots, especially if you're only keeping 8 linemen up on a game day, the math is not hard to figure out. You have 3 backups for 5 spots. So you may have to have people that can go play a number of different spots, because you don't necessarily always get to pick, who gets hurt, or, who would be the best person to replace based on the backup's particular skill set. So having somebody with versatility is a really important thing in the course of a season. Yes, I think in a perfect world, that's what they'd want him doing. They're going to have to get to this point with Ryan Kelly where they make a decision. And I think the cap dynamics of it, as we've talked about, may lead them to say, we're going to go in a different direction next year. Is that Brandell, or do you say Michael Juergens, come on down? I think they have to see improvement from Michael Juergens too. And I don't know how much they're going to get a look at that if Kelly is back. We'll have to see how the rest of the year goes. But, would they feel like there's enough time for Brandell and McCarthy in the offseason to work some of these things out and get a little smoother rapport? Possibly. But like you said, I think that versatility that he brings may be more valuable than trying to make him the center of the future. I think there could be other ways to go about that.
Our final question comes from Mike P. and came via email. Why didn't the Vikings just kick it out of the end zone instead of having any chance of a big return? This is, of course, referring to the end of the Bears game. Seems like even kicking it out of bounds might have been an acceptable alternative. Kevin O'Connell was basically asked this verbatim on Monday and said that they trusted their guys to defend it. And of course, we saw how that worked out. And we talked on Wednesday about Matt Daniels' kind of explanation of what happened there. It's just the gamble in a situation like that of a touchback is going to send them to the 35-yard line. Yeah. Do you think your guys can stop the returner before then? Do you think XYZ can happen? This has been an episode of us saying what ifs and how many what ifs there are in football. And that is certainly
it's playing percentages and making decisions.
Yeah. So there's not really much more of an answer there besides they called their shot, and unfortunately it didn't work out for them.
Well, and the hard thing with this stuff is you're making decisions based on percentages. And when I talk about that, I mean, what if we run this 1,000 times? How many times is this going to work? When we hear Kwesi talk about a Monte Carlo simulation, that's what that is. If we do something 1,000 times, what percentage of it is it going to go a certain way? In this case, it may be 720 times they get what they want or something like that, because their kick coverage units have been pretty good. I think they're probably figuring the odds of stopping somebody before the 35 are pretty high. It's the problem is you don't get to do this 1,000 times. You get to do it once. And when you get burned by it, it does invite a lot of should we have done something different? I don't know that the thought process is necessarily going to be different, but you have to execute it in that moment. And they did not there. I mean, I think overall, when kickers are as good as they are, you're kicking indoors, they're probably thinking, we don't want to spot the ball at the 35-yard line, because then they only need probably, 30 yards before they're in field goal range. And they had timeouts. They had time to work with. I think you're trying to say, let's pin them back as much as we can so that it takes time and they have to burn timeouts even to get themselves any closer to midfield. But, yeah, they got burned because people got greedy and tried to make a play and tried to kind of be the guy to end the game, or at least put the Bears in a bad spot. And that one time they ran that, obviously they got burned by it and it ended up costing them the game.
Yeah, and the part that I missed until Kevin O'Connell alluded to it was that Will Riker didn't exactly put the ball where it should have gone. It kind of landed more at the 4-yard line. He said earlier in the quarter we had evidence he could put it in that exact spot where it needed to go. And if you go back and watch it, the fourth quarter early on, he put it about 2 or 3 yards deep into the end zone.
Yeah.
So I wonder if they were open to taking the touchback, if Chicago was open to taking it, but if they were going to take a return, they were going to force it deep in the end zone of you're going to have to return it from back there. Instead, they basically gave him an additional 5 yards on the return by kicking that short. And then Ivan Pace, Ty Felton, and all those guys got a little wild there on the coverage.
Yeah.
That's all our listener questions. Let's spend a few minutes talking Vikings Flashback Friday. I did 3 games this week, so I bent my rules a little bit and watched the first game sped up, but I watched the full broadcast. And then I watched the second 2 games condensed versions. We were talking about the first 3 weeks of the 2020 season, which, if I recall from when you guys put this on the list, it wasn't because any one of these games was necessarily special. I guess one maybe a little bit, but mostly just for the ambiance of the 2020 season.
Something like that.
Yeah.
The cardboard cutouts. That's
the
what we
ambiance or lack thereof.
Yeah, we were talking. The first thing that came up as we were kind of getting on here before we hit record was the fake crowd noise, which was one of the very first notes I wrote down.
Just weird.
It was unsettling to me. Like just you could tell that it was so artificial, and it was like right at the perfect like decibel level. I think they even said what decibel. It was like 70 decibels
75.
on the broadcast. Yeah. That it like felt like white noise in like a very disconcerting way. And like when that first game of the season was against the Packers and was like a super high scoring game, it was like a 70-point game, there'd be touchdowns and the cheering doesn't change at all. It's still just like woo woo yeah. Like just like very moderate cheering. It was insane. Were they only doing that on the broadcast, or were they doing it in the stadium?
No, I don't remember pumped in crowd noise in the stadium because Ben, I remember the unsettling part being we could hear like from the press box, the sideline, not every sideline conversation, but we could hear like if a guy was yelling on the sideline, we could hear the audibles up at the line. Like
Justin Jefferson yelling at Kirk Cousins.
Yeah. That's right.
When he cussed out Cousins and said, "Come on, throw the ball." What week was that? That was later, wasn't it?
That was against the Bears, wasn't it? And I think it was late. I think it was later in the season. I can't quite remember when though. But it was just completely unsettling because you had the cardboard cutouts taking up certain sections near the end zone, and it was just obviously images of frozen fans not making any noise. The reverberations of the hard count of Aaron Rodgers, who was giving you the hard count at home when you were at home, because there was no crowd noise. Like just dystopian was the word.
Well, so a couple of memories from that game. There's a touchdown that gets reviewed. I think it's Aaron Jones. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And we could hear as they're showing the replay on the video boards, you could hear somebody from the Packers sideline going, "Oh, come on, that's a touchdown," or something like that. And just for people's context, we sit at US Bank Stadium behind the Vikings sideline, kind of off probably about the 10-yard line or so, kind of in the, not quite on the corner, but closer to the corner than the middle of the sideline. So it's one of those things that you're not typically going to hear anything from the Viking sideline, let alone the opposite sideline of the field. But the fact that you could hear it in the press box as clearly as we could was just one of those like jarring memories of that game and that season that, dystopian is a great word for it because it just felt very strange. The whole thing just felt so odd. Like they would still do the pregame production with the dry ice. They would shoot the cannon during touchdowns, but because there was nobody in the stand,
that's right.
When you're going to talk about Justin Jefferson, but when he was grittying into the end zone, I think by week 3, I got to the point where when somebody would get to the 5-yard line and I knew they were going to score, I would plug my ears at US Bank Stadium because that cannon, when there's nobody in there's no people in there to suck up the sound, and the sound waves just bounce off the seats is so loud. And that and the mayo on the sandwiches. Trying to get you going on this, but oh my gosh, that season. Let's never ever do that again.
I can't bring myself to complain about free food, but I certainly did in that moment.
Well, so they would have a press meal, and it would depend on where you were, but it would usually be like a packaged sandwich or something, and they would typically put mayo on the sandwiches rather than giving you the option of whether you wanted mayo or not.
Yeah.
So
not a mayo guy.
And look, there were a lot of things wrong in the world, and there still are, but that
was a first world problem. But
that was one of them for me.
But it was like, and I was with you because it was like they'd have the mayo packets. And I remember you tweeting during the middle of the season, "I don't know who needs to hear this, but stop putting mayo on sandwiches when you can give people the option to put it on later if they want it." It was like 100% on that. So it was just, the whole thing was very strange. Anyway, Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, Justin Jefferson's the main thing. The only other two things I was gonna shout out before talking Justin Jefferson a little bit is that, oh God, I just lost my train of thought. Where was the note I was looking at? Oh, one is that it's been fun to know that Harrison Smith is a constant in all of these games and that he's just always going to be there. He has an interception in the third game of this season. He's a really good first half, if not full game of that. It's the Vikings-Colts game in week 3, but it's been fun just like no matter how many
Colts
pieces around. What?
Colts was week 2.
Oh, so then who was week 3? I was
Titans.
just Titans, yes. He had a good game against the Titans. So it's just been fun, like knowing that no matter who changes on this roster, like Harrison Smith will be here the whole time for this entire run because he has aligned with everything here. And then, do you guys remember that there was a safety each in the first 2 games of this season?
Kind of.
No, I do not remember that at all. No.
I briefly looked away in game 1 and looked back and the score was like 5-3. And I was like, well, that's not a football score, so I have to rewind it.
If you would have screenshot that, I would have thought that was fake. There's
yeah,
no
they're both against the Vikings. So the Vikings get pinned deep, or as far as I can recall, they're both against the Vikings. But I was like, wow, I feel like we don't see a lot of safeties. And for them to happen back-to-back weeks against the same team, I was like, that's real 2020 energy.
Well, and then the Jefferson piece of this, like they didn't start him the first 2 weeks of that season. Mike Zimmer was like, he's a rookie. We didn't have preseason. Training camp was kind of weird. And Jefferson actually, I think, had COVID right at the beginning of camp. I think he was on the COVID list at the start of it, so he missed some time there too. They did not.
He was quarantined in his hotel room.
Yes.
Remember that?
Yes. So that's how it all started for him. They did not start him those first 2 games. And I think the second week, because they were awful against the Colts, like their offense could not do anything. And there was this feeling of, why are they keeping this kid on the sideline? And I think he played a little bit, but it was like Tajay Sharp and BC Johnson and
Adam Thielen,
and probably still Diggs was gone. Because that was trade.
Diggs was gone, yeah.
Right. So it was just this, like, why are they not starting this kid? And then week 3, they finally said, okay, we're going to play him. And then he breaks out. And it's like, okay, they're starting him from here on out. But yeah, he put up the numbers he put up. You know, I think it's 1475 in terms of receiving yards that season. Basically sitting the first 2 games because they were like, no, we're not playing a rookie. Don't care. He's not ready. Like, he was probably ready.
I'm pulling up. He had okay, so it does say that he had 2 catches in week 1 on 3 targets for 26 yards. Right. And then week 2 he had he did lead in receiving yards week 2, 3 targets, 3 receptions, 44 yards. That was a bad game for Adam Thielen. He had only 3 catches on 8 targets. That's like what we were seeing last week, 2 weeks ago. And then, of course, week 3 is
9 for $175.
Yeah, 7 receptions for 175 and the long touchdown that just kind of, would have sent the place electric if there had been anyone in the stands to see it.
The first gritty in the NFL for Justin Jefferson, and there were Andrew and I were 2 of a couple hundred people in the stadium to see it. I mean, it's the people working the game. It's obviously the players and coaches. And then however many of us were sitting up in the press box at US Bank Stadium to see it. So yeah, very, very surreal season.
The first of many gritties, Mr. Jefferson.
I was going to say, like, that's like witnessing the solidification of history or something. Becomes a cultural phenomenon. Like, now you go to Vikings games and at least once a game they have a gritty cam, and every child below the age of 10 knows how to do it. I think do you think children in Minneapolis are born knowing how to gritty at this point?
I mean, I have been to my kids' elementary schools. I mean, I have one in middle school now, one in 5th grade, but like recess, I mean, it's or gym class, it's everywhere. I mean, this is like, teachers see it all the time. And I mean, it's like just one of these things that happens. But yes, it was. I mean, maybe that's something that we'll, be able to. It's something we can tell at parties, Andrew, that we were one of the few. We reached one of the few people in the stadium to see it the first time in the NFL. He'd obviously done it at LSU, so it wasn't new to the world. But the first time in the NFL, We were among a very select audience that was there to see that thing live.
Us and the cardboard cutouts.
Yep. You remember late in the season, like I think there were certain stadiums when they started to let a few fans in, like for the playoffs, and I think the Packers hosted the NFC title game, and they had fans. They're probably like 7,000 fans or something, and they're taking like the seat cushions and banging them on the bleachers to try to make noise. And
yep.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it just was very, very odd. The whole year was odd.
And there's like a section of like 50 family and friends that were like allowed to be there at every game, just this small, and they all had to sit apart. So there was only one section that had real people in it, but they all had to sit like 6 feet apart. Yeah. And you could hear them
later in the year that they allowed that, I think.
That's right. Yeah. Well, I suppose it wasn't even at the beginning.
Okay, that's interesting because on the third broadcast, one of the like tiny snippets I got in the condensed game of like the commentators talking was them mentioning that they thought they were talking about protocol to get some level of fans into the venue.
It was a negotiation with the state, I think.
It eventually just turned into a small set, at least in Minnesota. It was only a small section of team like staffers and stuff that were allowed, players' families and relatives were allowed to come out. So you'd hear them cheer, and then it would just echo and reverberate, and then that was it.
Yeah.
And then just on the broadcast.
I remember at the week after that game, I think they played week 4 in Houston, and they were allowing fans, I think it was probably 12,000 or something like that, in the stadium. And there were, I think, a couple of games that season. I think it was Houston and Tampa. So, states where the laws were a little looser, but that would be the difference. It depended on what state you were in and what the local laws were, whether there were going to be fans in the stands or not. So, any given week, it would be dependent on what the local climate was like. I can remember in November that year, my other weird memory of this season was they're in Chicago on a Monday night in mid-November, and they just started a shelter-in-place order. And Chip Scoggins and I are there covering the game. And I rented a car, and we're staying out by O'Hare. We drive into Chicago, middle of what should have been middle of rush hour, no traffic. Like nobody on the roads, driving around, drove up to Soldier Field. They, check our parking pass, wave us in. The whole parking lot's empty. It's like, I mean, you talk about dystopian, like that city at that time of the day, like, just drive in, go wherever you want. It just was just so strange.
Yeah, that's really all the takeaways I had, because these were not spectacular games to watch by any means outside of that Jefferson performance. So we will call it there. All three of us will be in Green Bay this weekend as the Vikings play the Packers at Lambeau Field. So we'll be back together for the post-game pod recapping that. We'll see if the Vikings keep their NFC North, if they can then close out their road trip 3-0 and be 3-0 in the NFC North, or if they drop their first road trip of the season in the NFC North. I don't know. We'll see on this one, but thanks for listening, and we will talk with you then.